Of all the stupid things governments like to waste our money on, the first thing that probably doesn't come to your mind is sci-fi weapons programs that look like they belong in a Hollywood movie. Considering what's happening these days, it probably does, but you get what I'm trying to say. So, what happens when the US government says to arms developers in the 1980s, "Hey guys, we want a new, more accurate rifle to replace the tried and tested M16A1, but we need it to improve hit probability and capabilities by 100%. Don't worry, you can get complete creative control to make whatever you want, and the US taxpayer will pick up the tab as long as it's more accurate than an M16. Well, you get a 4-year, $300 million horror show of cursed weapons that look like a war crime. This is the story of the Advanced Combat Rifle Program. It all started in the early 1980s when the US Committee on Armed Services asked the Joint Service Small Arms Program of the US Army to study the M16A1 and find out if it was still a competent rifle and the best choice for the military. They found that it was a good rifle, but could be improved. The technology base should be developed to support a significant improvement in capability, meaning the Army's new gun needed to move away from conventional ammunition and actions. They eventually began a long-term project to develop an advanced combat rifle that could use a new, radical ammo type. This project became the Caseless Ammunition Rifle System, or CARS, which transformed into the ACR program. The Advanced Combat Rifle Program began in January 1985 to foster the development and select a rifle that would give troops a distinct advantage on the battlefield. The project aimed to address the human shortcomings of the average soldier on the field. Combat stress, fear, and fatigue negatively impacted a rifleman's ability to hit a target once engaged in combat. The ACR program sought to compensate for this by maximizing hit probability when engaging fleeing targets in battlefield conditions. The program called for an enhancement in hit probability of at least 100% at combat ranges over the baseline performance of the M16A2 rifle at extended ranges. The improvement required will be greater than 100%. The weapon will be expected to enable the rifleman to detect targets at ranges greater than 400 meters in offensive action and at least 1,000 meters during the conduct of the defense. There was no pressure then, considering they were calling for a weapon with an optic and the ability to engage long-range targets wearing body armor and fleeing targets. It was asking a lot. However, the ACR program was far from the US military's first ambitious small arms project. The US government built the ACR program on the Special Purpose Individual Weapon SPIW program established in the 1950s to produce the next generation of infantry weapons capable of firing bursts of flechettes at excessively high rates of fire to improve hit probability. This task proved technologically insurmountable during the 1950s and 60s. The SPIW program ended in the late 1960s, but was followed in the early 1970s by the Future Rifle program, which was also a failure. Despite these failures, the programs helped to push small arms technological boundaries. The approaches used by the companies that entered the ACR competition varied greatly, ranging from rifles with complex buffer systems to weapons that fired duplex and flechette rounds. In September 1985, the US government made the first request for proposals, and 6 companies successfully submitted proposals. The government developed the ACR program in 3 phases. The first sent 6 contracts to AAI, Heckler & Koch, ARES, COLT, STEYR and McDonnell Douglas. The US contracted AAI and Heckler & Koch to explore salvo and caseless ammo types. Phase 1 concluded with a test fire of the rifles that eliminated ARES and McDonnell Douglas. In 1987, following Phase 1 of the program, ARES and MDHS were dropped due to hardware immaturity as the concepts were underdeveloped. Both companies appealed and were allowed to enter designs for Phase 2, but they were not good enough to compete in the later trials and testing. Phase 2 consisted of a basic testing of the rifles and their ammo types to ensure they were safe to enter a field testing phase. Phase 2 was a planning phase. However, the Navy and Marine Corps withdrew support from the program. Phase 3 occurred in 1989, and the military took the 4 rifles to Fort Benning, now Fort Moore. The US government instructed Army and Air Force personnel to use ACR rifles, and the M16A2 was a control group. The M16A2 had been the standard service rifle since 1982 up until that point. The Army put the contesting rifles through a grueling schedule of field testing that simulated combat conditions and exposed them to various environmental factors. It also scored on the evaluation of dispersion of fire, hit performance, ease of use, reliability, and safety. The 2 branches even ensured both men and women were involved in testing to see if gender discrepancies existed in how the weapons performed. Each company approached the program's aims differently. 2 utilized flechette technology, which the US had developed during the SPIW program, with the AAI using a brass-cased round, while the STEYR ACR used a polymer case. COLT's entry used a duplex round with 2 projectiles stacked in the cartridge case. The Heckler & Koch G11 used a complex buffer system to reduce felt recoil after firing a hyperburst of 3 rounds at 2,000 rounds per minute. Anyway, enough exposition. Let's begin with STEYR and AAI. They were both similar in their design. AAI Corporation had long been involved in advanced firearms design, partaking in the US military's previous programs. The AAI ACR was an evolution of the earlier SFR XM19 rifle. They also based it on an earlier design developed for the SPIW program. AAI's ACR was gas-operated, feeding from a 30-round box magazine, and fired a brass-cased flechette round in either a single shot or a high cyclic rate 3-round burst. The rifle used an ACOG 4x optic with a 21.3-inch smoothbore barrel. The gun fired long saboted flechettes from 5.56 casings and could not fire 5.56mm rounds. The flechettes were 1.6mm wide and 41.27mm long. They were swift and produced minimal recoil. The AAI ACR featured an integrated sound flash suppressor, without which it was deafening and would create a bright muzzle flash. It fired from a closed bolt, and the AAI had a muzzle device to reduce muzzle climb during burst fire. AAI developed a polymer saboted steel 10.2 GR flechette in a standard M855 brass case. As a result, the rifle used a proprietary magazine to avoid the accidental chambering of conventional 5.56 x 45mm rounds. These rounds had a muzzle velocity of 4,600 feet per second. The gun was designed to mount a quick detachable 4x optic and had a white highlighted shotgun-style rib sight along the barrel to aid in snap shooting. The rifle was one of the most extended entries, with an overall length of 40 inches or 101.6 centimeters. According to the ACR program summary, the AAI entry was a mature design which performed reliably during the field trials. STEYR Mannlicher's bullpup entry used a gas piston-driven rising chamber mechanism which rose and fell to chamber rounds as the action cycled. Like AAI's entry, the STEYR ACR fired flechettes, but STEYR housed their ammunition inside a cylindrical polymer case. The bullpup STEYR was the second shortest at 30 inches, 76 centimeters, and the lightest of the rifles submitted, weighing 8.5 pounds, 3.86 kilograms. The STEYR ACR borrowed its ergonomics from its conventional forebear, the AUG, with a molded green plastic stock and a similar pistol grip, trigger and safety layout. Unlike the AUG, however, the ACR used an AR-15 style charging handle at the rear of the sight mounting block. A variable 1 to 3.5 times optic could be attached to the rifle. The STEYR ACR had a 21-inch barrel, but was only 30.7 inches long. The gun did not use a conventional bolt. Instead, it had a rising chamber when fired from an open bolt. When a soldier pulled the trigger, a live round entered the chamber, thus reducing the potential for cook-offs. When a rifleman fired the gun, spent polymer cases were pushed out of the chamber and ejected from an opening just in front of the magazine well feeding from a 24-round box magazine made from the same translucent material used in conventional AUG magazines. The magazine went from double stack to single stack to allow it to feed reliably. As a result, they had to shorten the capacity. STEYR planned a high-capacity drum magazine but did not provide for the trials. The rifle fired incredibly fast 1.6-inch long flechettes, which moved at nearly 5,000 feet per second. By comparison, a 5.56mm round from an M16 moves at about 3,000 feet per second. The rifle had very low recoil and was the cheapest of the 4 finalists to produce. The polymer case held a fin-stabilized 9.85 GR flechette with a molded 4-piece sabot, which broke up soon after exiting the muzzle, which was identified as a shortcoming as it risked hitting nearby troops. For some reason, they decided in their infinite wisdom that they weren't going to shoot bullets but flechettes, which, if you didn't know, are large metal darts, and their logic behind doing this was that it would be more accurate. To put this into perspective, the muzzle velocity of a 556 round is approximately 3,000 feet per second, while an AK-47 7.62 x 39mm round travels roughly 2,200 feet per second. The flechettes, however, were leaving the barrel at 409,000 feet per second. Theoretically, this meant that the shooter didn't need to compensate for bullet drop, increasing accuracy. That's the general concept of what both companies built their rifle around, and that's where the similarities end, as STEYR decided they would place their flechette inside of a polymer-cased ammunition. The polymer case rounds weighed half as much as a brass case round, which sounds great because that meant you could carry more ammunition, which meant more accuracy by volume, and in the US Army, more is better. That's great in theory. The issue they ran into was when they fired a bullet. It's a small, controlled explosion, and when that happens inside a piece of brass, the brass absorbs much of the heat. Therefore, much of the heat was ejected from the weapon when the soldier fired the gun. Still, when you apply that to a polymer casing, the polymer doesn't absorb nearly as much heat before its ejection, meaning that all that heat goes back into the barrel. Therefore, the barrels wore out more quickly, and if you fired too much, the barrel got too hot. Then, if you put the polymer case ammunition into the chamber, it would cook off. The rounds would explode, and you would need to book an appointment with a reconstructive plastic surgeon. So the STEYR was out. AAI decided they were going to place their flechette inside of a 556 brass casing, and it was more effective. The barrels lasted longer, the rounds didn't cook off, and it seemingly fixed the issue that STEYR had. But the problem is, they put a flechette inside of a 556 round, which if you're not aware, is the same size as the M16 round, meaning that, in theory, you could stick these inside of an M16. You could stick a regular 556 ammo inside the AAI rifle, but as soon as you tried to fire a regular 556 round, it would probably book you a second appointment with that plastic surgeon. So that was the end of the AAI. Now it's time for the gun you've all been waiting for. It's the magnetic accelerator gun from 1993's Demolition Man, a documentary I like to call Life Simulator 2020's edition. The Heckler & Koch G11 rifle was the most radical of the 4 gun designs. It featured a bullpup layout and used an incredibly complicated internal mechanism. Heckler & Koch created a next-generation infantry weapon alongside the West German Bundeswehr. The result was the G11. The G11 had been in development since the late 1960s, and by the time H&K entered it into the ACR program, it had evolved into a complex weapon unlike any other. Utilizing a gas-operated rotary breech to fire self-contained caseless 4.73x33mm projectiles, H&K introduced a rotary breech chamber to clear misfired, broken, or defective cartridges from the enclosed system. The caseless design proved a lighter and smaller option for a 45 to 50 round box magazine. Multiple magazines could even be mounted to the gun for quick reloads. H&K sacrificed simplicity to achieve reliability. The US had awarded H&K a contract to develop caseless ammunition, optics, and the salvo concept in 1982. With the G11 in development, they then entered the ACR program. The Bullpup H&K was the shortest of the weapons entered into the trial at 29.5 inches / 74.9 centimeters. The rifle had a variable 1 to 3.5 times optic designed by Swarovski. Dynamit Nobel AG developed the revolutionary ammunition. The finalized 4.73x33mm 51GR round comprised a solid propellant material body that encased a primer, booster, projectile, and a plastic nose cap. Dynamit Nobel developed the high ignition temperature propellant HITP to prevent accidental ignition cook-off of the ammunition's outer propellant body. The ACR program summary notes that most of the malfunctions/stoppages experienced in the field experiment were ammunition-related. H&K fed the ACR ammunition from a single stack, a horizontally oriented 45-round magazine that sat above the barrel. The G11 used a counter-recoil buffer mechanism to allow high rates of burst fire, hyperburst. When firing 3-round bursts, the weapon could send the rounds downrange at a rate of 2,100 rounds per minute. Only when the last round had left the barrel did the barrel and action begin to recoil inside the stock along a central guide. The recoil impulse was then quite strong. When in sustained fire, the rate of fire was closer to 460 per minute. The G11 fired caseless ammunition, and the red block was the propellant, or the black powder itself, which got burned up, and nothing ejected out of the gun. The Germans figured out how to solve the polymer case ammunition's heating issue by not having a casing, because, of course, they did. The internet has named this rifle Kraut Space Magic for a reason. While caseless ammunition is a cool idea, it won't make it more accurate. So their strategy was to make this gun shoot the aforementioned 2,100 rounds per minute in a 3-round burst. That meant that the rifle was so fast in 3-round burst mode that when you pulled the trigger, it would fire all 3 rounds before the person shooting the gun felt the recoil from the first bullet. And that worked out great, but after the 3rd round left the barrel, it kicked you like a horse. That's an interesting concept, and it did appear to work. So why didn't the US pick up the G11? The caseless ammunition was going to be extremely expensive. Germans designed this rifle, but they were left unsupervised and given zero budget, so naturally it was over-engineered. The gun was reliable, according to the testing. Still, it was so complicated that when it needed repairs, it had to be taken to Leonardo da Vinci just to get fixed, because the inside looked like a clock. So that was the end of the G11. It did get a cameo in a cult movie, which is more than can be said for the others. The final entry has to be respected, just for the bag between the legs of COLT it would have taken to pull this off, which is astronomical. Their entry was the most conventional of the designs submitted. Based on the rifle the program sought to replace. COLT's ACR was an improved M16, which fired conventional 5.56x45mm ammunition and a new 5.56mm duplex round. The 5.56 duplex load fired 1 cartridge with 2 projectiles to provide a soldier extra hit potential with every round fired. However, duplex rounds had significantly less accuracy at ranges beyond 300 meters than the standard M16A2. Anyone who'd ever fired an M16 could easily handle the COLT ACR. It's still a direct impingement rifle that fed from box magazines. While the duplex round increased hit probability at shorter ranges, it impacted long-range accuracy, requiring the additional use of conventional M855 rounds. It incorporated a variety of improvements, including a new oil spring hydraulic buffer to mitigate recoil, a reshaped pistol grip, and a handguard that mounted a sighting rib for snap shooting and multi-position stock. The weapon had a flat-top, upper-railed receiver, so a soldier could fit a 3.5x optic, an early ECLAN, or a more conventional sight/carrying handle. The rifle's collapsible, 6-position telescopic buttstock was an improved version of that offered with COLT's carbines. The COLT ACR was the most extended rifle tested at full extension, 40.6 inches or 103 centimeters long. Knight's Armament designed and added a distinctive proprietary muzzle brake compensator. During testing, one of the duplex rounds was not properly seated inside the cartridge case and, when fired, became lodged in the barrel. The weapon's barrel blew when a soldier fired another round during a firefight. A slightly larger propellant charge addressed this. The government employed features developed for the ACR entry in the M16A3 and A4. This rifle is a straight-up M16. There is nothing special about it whatsoever. COLT had been selling weapons to the US military for years. Between the M16 and 1911, they knew their audience and how to sell to Uncle Sam. Their design proposition when they walked into the lab must have been, listen guys, so while everyone else is making alien space technology, we're going to take an M16, slap a massive foregrip on it, and say that it helps with target acquisition, then stick a scope on top of that bad boy that makes it more accurate. We're going to design a new type of bullet, where 2 bullets go in one casing, and call it a duplex round. Their pitch was to sell the US government the same rifle, but every magazine now had 60 bullets, not 30, so it was double the fun. Or you could fire on semi-automatic. Anyway, the 3-round burst just became a 6-round burst. It's still full auto, but it's at 2 times speed. So it looked as if COLT was going to win the bid. However, someone realized the obvious and pointed out that the only thing making the gun more accurate was a scope. And all these other rifles have scopes. Why don't we try putting one of those scopes on a regular M16 and see what happens? Soldiers couldn't remove the scope on the G11 and the STEYR because they were European and too fancy and clever. But shooters could pop off the scopes on the COLT and the AAI, and when that happened, would you look at that? The M16 was more accurate than all the other rifles. So that is what the US military went with. The scope became the N134 that snaps on every 240, and to this day, the scope on the AAI is the ACOG. Now, all they had to do was buy a bunch of new scopes instead of new rifles. It's okay though. They were only in the red on the money it cost for all the research and development of 4 new guns from the ground up, which only cost the taxpayer $300 million to work out that putting a scope on a rifle does indeed make it more accurate. After several years of development, while the Army organized testing, the 4 firms delivered their prototypes in 1990. During Phase 3, they tested the rifles on the specially built Buckner range, designed to recreate field conditions and create fleeing targets at various ranges. The M16A2 was a baseline weapon throughout all the tests, including safety and engineering testing, lethality tests, and testing in field conditions. Initially planned as an all-services test, the US Navy and Marine Corps left the ACR program in 1987, leaving the Army and the Air Force. With the testing complete, none of the rifles proved significantly more lethal or effective than the M16A2. The program summary put a somewhat positive spin on the program's failings, concluding that the ACR program was a success despite the increased hit probabilities not being attained as a technology-based program. The soldiers taking part in the field tests performed better than expected, and the baseline performance of the M16A2 rifle was better than anticipated in terms of hit probability. The report concluded that the program had helped push small arms technology forward, noting that while flechettes proved too inaccurate for an individual weapon, the feasibility of caseless and lightweight plastic-cased ammunition has more than been demonstrated in this program. Few problems were experienced with the H&K caseless rifles in the test. The past technical barriers of cook-off and vulnerability have now been overcome. Plastic cases cannot be used in conventional weapons like the M16A2, but complete plastic cases are feasible with designed weapons. With the end of the ACR program, the school of thought moved towards high explosive and airburst munitions by individual soldiers. The Objective Individual Combat Weapon program ran throughout the early 1990s and led to the adoption of new weapons, such as the M320 grenade launcher. It also failed in its goal to create an integrated individual weapon system. In summary, governments are utterly useless at everything, and this proves it. This video is a tale of how America got ACOG scopes and M134 machine gun optics, and a cameo of a wholly impractical, space-age German laser rifle in a cool movie because they decided that it would be a brilliant idea to spend $300 million to replace a gun that didn't need replacing, and realizing that slapping a scope on top of the rifle does make it a more accurate weapon. After 4 years, numerous testing, and ungodly amounts of cash, the program was ultimately dissolved in 1990, failing to achieve its goals. They weren't paying for any of it, so I guess it was high fives.